The judge called the cops on a black girl making hand signals. But when the officer arrived, Judge William Hawthorne prided himself on his ability to read people. After 30 years on the bench in the small town of Millbrook, he believed he had seen it all. 62, his salt and pepper hair and stern demeanor commanded respect in his courtroom, where he was known for his no-nonsense approach to justice. Born and raised in Millbrook, Judge Hawthorne came from a long line of legal professionals. His father had been a judge before him, and his grandfather a prominent lawyer. The weight of family legacy and tradition sat heavily on his shoulders, shaping his worldview and his approach to the law. Despite his years of experience, Judge Hawthorne had become increasingly out of touch with the changing world around him. He viewed the recent push for criminal justice reform with skepticism, seeing it as a threat to the order he had spent his career upholding. His resistance to change had begun to color his judgments, though he would never admit it. On the other side of town lived Zoe Johnson, a bright and spirited 14-year-old girl with dreams as big as her smile. The youngest of 3 children, Zoe had grown up in a loving family that had to work twice as hard for everything they had. Her mother, Tanya, was a dedicated nurse at the local hospital, while her father, Marcus, worked long hours as a mechanic. Zoe had a secret that set her apart from her peers. She was hard of hearing and used sign language to communicate. However, she never let this define her. Instead, she saw it as just another part of what made her unique. With the support of her family and her best friend, Alex, Zoe navigated the world with confidence and determination. At school, Zoe was an excellent student, particularly excelling in science and mathematics. She dreamed of becoming an engineer, inspired by the hours she spent watching her father work on cars. Despite facing occasional bullying and misunderstanding due to her hearing impairment, Zoe remained resilient and kind-hearted. Zoe's world and Judge Hawthorne's were about to collide in an unexpected way. On a warm Saturday afternoon, Zoe decided to visit the courthouse. Her class was working on a project about local government, and she wanted to sketch the historic building for her presentation. As Zoe sat on a bench outside the courthouse, sketchpad in hand, she was unaware of the eyes watching her from a second-story window. Judge Hawthorne, working late on case files, noticed the young girl making what appeared to him to be strange gestures. In that moment, the judge's years of experience and his deeply ingrained biases converged. Without considering other possibilities, he reached for his phone to call the local police. Little did he know that this single action would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge his perceptions, shake the foundations of the community, and potentially change lives forever. As the call connected and Judge Hawthorne began to speak, Zoe continued her animated conversation in sign language with Alex, who was on a video call on Zoe's phone, propped up on the bench. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal the best and worst of human nature and force a small town to confront its deepest held beliefs about justice, compassion, and understanding. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Judge William Hawthorne peered out his second-story window. His gaze fixed on the young black girl sitting on the bench below, her hands moving in what he perceived as erratic, suspicious movements. Millbrook Police Department. How can I assist you? The voice on the other end of the line was crisp and professional. This is Judge William Hawthorne, he began, his tone authoritative. I'm calling from the courthouse. There's a suspicious individual outside making what appear to be gang signs or some sort of coded gestures. I believe this warrants immediate investigation. As the judge provided a description of Zoe, emphasizing her unusual behavior, Officer Sarah Chen was dispatched to the scene. A recent transfer from a larger city, Officer Chen approached her job with a blend of caution and compassion that sometimes put her at odds with the more traditional members of the Millbrook Police Department. Meanwhile, oblivious to the alarm she had inadvertently caused, Zoe continued her animated conversation with Alex. They were excitedly discussing their upcoming science fair project, with Zoe's hands flying as she described her ideas for a sustainable energy demonstration. I think we should use solar panels to power a small fan, Zoe signed, her expressions as vibrant as her gestures. It'll show how renewable energy can be practical in everyday life. Alex's enthusiastic response was cut short as a police cruiser pulled up to the curb, its lights flashing. Zoe, engrossed in her conversation, didn't notice the approach of Officer Chen until the officer was just a few feet away. "Excuse me, miss," Officer Chen said, her voice calm but firm. "I need to speak with you for a moment." Startled, Zoe looked up, her eyes widening as she took in the officer's uniform and serious expression. She quickly signed to Alex that she had to go and ended the call, her heart beginning to race. "Is everything okay?" Zoe asked, her voice carrying the slight inflection common to those who are hard of hearing. Officer Chen's trained eye quickly took in the situation, the sketch pad, the phone, and the girl's obvious confusion. Something didn't add up with the report she had received. "I'm Officer Chen," she began, her tone softening slightly. "We received a call about suspicious activity in this area. Can you tell me what you're doing here?" Zoe's hands instinctively began to move as she spoke, signing along with her words as she often did when nervous. "I'm just working on a school project. I was sketching the courthouse and talking to my friend Alex about our science fair." Officer Chen's eyebrows rose in recognition. "Are you using sign language?" she asked, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Zoe nodded, relief washing over her face. "Yes, I'm hard of hearing. I use sign language to communicate, especially when I'm on video calls with my friends." As understanding dawned, Officer Chen felt a mix of relief and frustration. The situation was clearly a misunderstanding, but one that highlighted deeper issues within the community. Just then, the courthouse doors swung open, and Judge Hawthorne strode out, his face set in stern lines. "Officer," called out, "have you determined what this individual was up to?" Officer Chen turned to face the judge, positioning herself slightly in front of Zoe in what was almost a protective stance. "Yes, Your Honor. It appears there's been a misunderstanding. This young lady was simply using sign language to communicate with a friend while working on a school project." Judge Hawthorne's face flushed, a mix of embarrassment and indignation crossing his features. "Sign language? But I thought. I understand the confusion, Your Honor," Officer Chen said diplomatically, "but everything checks out. There's no cause for concern here." As the judge struggled to reconcile his assumptions with reality, a small crowd had begun to gather. Among them was Mrs. Rosalie Thompson, Zoe's science teacher, who had been passing by on her way home. "Zoe?" Mrs. Thompson called out, hurrying over. "Is everything all right?" Zoe, still shaken but feeling more confident with a familiar face present, explained the situation. Mrs. Thompson's expression shifted from concern to barely contained anger as she realized what had transpired. "Judge Hawthorne," she said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion, "Zoe is one of our brightest students. She's here working on a project about local government. I hope there hasn't been any misunderstanding due to her use of sign language." The judge, now acutely aware of the growing crowd and the murmurs spreading through it, attempted to regain his composure. "Of course not," he said stiffly. "It was merely a routine check, nothing more." But the damage was done. In the span of just a few minutes, a series of assumptions and hasty actions had exposed undercurrents of prejudice and misunderstanding that ran deep in Millbrook. As Officer Chen began to wrap up the incident, assuring Zoe that she was free to continue her project, the girl's parents arrived, having been called by a concerned neighbor who had witnessed the police arrival. "What's going on here?" Marcus Johnson demanded, protective instincts flaring as he took in the scene. His daughter, police officer, and the imposing figure of Judge Hawthorne. As explanations were repeated and tensions rose, it became clear that this incident was far from over. The actions of the next few minutes would set in motion a chain of events that would force Millbrook to confront uncomfortable truth. In just 3 minutes, a misunderstanding had ballooned into a situation that would challenge the very foundations of the community. As the crowd continued to grow and emotions ran high, the stage was set for a confrontation that would change Millbrook forever. Tension in the air was palpable as Marcus and Tanya Johnson stood protectively on either side of their daughter. The small crowd that had gathered outside the courthouse buzzed with whispers and speculations, their eyes darting between Zoe, parents, Officer Chen, and Judge Hawthorne. "I demand to know why my daughter was treated like a criminal," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled anger. She was doing nothing wrong. Before Judge Hawthorne could respond, Officer Chen stepped forward, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the charged atmosphere. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, I assure you that no one is accusing Zoe of any wrongdoing. There was a misunderstanding, which has now been cleared up. Tanya, her nurse's intuition kicking in, noticed the way Zoe's hands were trembling slightly. She signed quickly to her daughter, asking if she was okay. Zoe's response, a mixture of signs and whispered words, caught the attention of those nearby. "Wait a minute," called out Mr. Grayson, a longtime resident of Millbrook, who had been watching the scene unfold. "Is that sign language? I've seen those gestures before. A hospital." His words seemed to break a dam of realization among the onlookers. Suddenly, people began to connect the dots. The suspicious gestures that had alarmed Judge Hawthorne were nothing more than a young girl communicating in her native language. As murmurs of understanding spread through the crowd, Mrs. Thompson stepped forward again. "Perhaps," she suggested, her voice carrying clearly despite its soft tone, "this is an opportunity for education. Zoe, would you be willing to show everyone a bit of sign language?" Zoe, emboldened by the support of her parents and teacher, nodded. With a deep breath, she began to sign, her movements graceful and expressive. As she did so, Mrs. Thompson translated for the crowd. "My name is Zoe Johnson," she signed. "I'm 14 years old and I'm hard of hearing. Sign language is how I communicate best, especially when I'm excited or talking with my friends. I was here today because I love this courthouse. I want to be an engineer someday, and beautiful old buildings like this inspire me." As Zoe continued, something remarkable began to happen. The tension in the air started to dissipate, replaced by a sense of wonder and curiosity. People leaned in, watching intently as Zoe's hands danced through the air, telling her story. Even Judge Hawthorne, who had been standing rigidly throughout the confrontation, found himself transfixed. The girl he had perceived as a threat just minutes ago was revealed to be a bright, articulate young woman, with dreams and aspirations, not unlike those of his own granddaughter. As Zoe finished her impromptu demonstration, a moment of profound silence fell over the crowd. It was broken by the sound of slow, deliberate clapping. All eyes turned to see Mayor Linda Carter, who had arrived unnoticed during Zoe's signing. "Thank you, Zoe," the mayor said, her voice carrying the weight of official authority tempered with genuine emotion. "I think we've all learned something incredibly valuable today." She turned to address the crowd, her gaze lingering pointedly on Judge Hawthorne. "What we've witnessed here is a stark reminder of the dangers of assumption and the importance of understanding. Millbrook prides itself on being a community that values all its members. Clearly, we have work to do." The mayor's words seemed to break the spell that had fallen over the gathering. People began to talk among themselves, many approaching Zoe and her parents with words of support and apology. Officer Chen, seeing an opportunity to turn the situation into a positive learning experience, suggested to the Johnsons that they might consider filing a formal complaint to ensure such misunderstandings didn't happen in the future. As the crowd began to disperse, Judge Hawthorne found himself face to face with Zoe and her parents. The weight of his mistake pressed heavily upon him, challenging years of deeply ingrained beliefs and assumptions. I owe you an apology," began, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "My actions were hasty and unjustified. I made assumptions that were not only incorrect but harmful." Zoe, showing a maturity beyond her years, looked the judge in the eye and signed her response, which her mother translated. "Thank you for your apology, Your Honor. I hope that next time you see someone using sign language, you'll remember this day and smile instead of calling the police." As the Johnsons turned to leave, Marcus paused and looked back at the judge. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "What happened here today is just the tip of the iceberg. It's time for some real changes in Millbrook." Judge Hawthorne watched them go, turbulent mix of emotions churning within him. In just 3 minutes, his world had been turned upside down. The revelation of his own biases and the discovery of a vibrant, often overlooked part of his community left him grappling with uncomfortable truth. As the sun began to set on the courthouse steps, casting long shadows across the scene of the afternoon's events, was clear that this was just the beginning. The revelation sparked by Zoe's sign language had set in motion a chain of events that would challenge Millbrook to its core, forcing its residents to confront their prejudices and re-examine their understanding of justice, communication, and community. In the days following the incident at the courthouse, Judge William Hawthorne found himself at a crossroads. The events of that Saturday afternoon had shaken him to his core, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself. As he sat in his chambers, staring at the case files piled on his desk, couldn't focus. The image of Zoe Johnson's expressive hands signing her story kept replaying in his mind, along with the looks of disappointment and anger on the faces of the townspeople he had served for decades. After hours of internal struggle, Judge Hawthorne made a decision that would alter the course of his career and the future of Millbrook. He picked up his phone and dialed the number for Mayor Linda Carter. "Linda," he said when she answered, his voice gruff with emotion, "I think it's time we had a serious discussion about implementing some changes in our town." The mayor, who had been expecting this call, listened intently as Judge Hawthorne outlined his ideas. He proposed a town hall meeting to address the issues of bias and misunderstanding that had been brought to light. Furthermore, he suggested the formation of a community task force to examine and improve relations between law enforcement, the justice system, and marginalized groups within Millbrook. "I want to be part of the solution," Linda concluded. "I've been part of the problem for too long without even realizing it." Mayor Carter, both surprised and pleased by the judge's initiative, agreed to support his proposals. "This is a brave step, William," she said. "I think it's exactly what Millbrook needs right now." The consequences of Judge Hawthorne's decision were immediate and far-reaching. News of the proposed town hall meeting spread quickly through Millbrook, eliciting a range of reactions from the community. Many, particularly younger residents and those from minority groups, welcomed the initiative as a long-overdue step towards addressing systemic issues in the town. Others, including some of the judge's longtime supporters, viewed it with suspicion, seeing it as an unnecessary concession to what they termed political correctness. A local newspaper, the Millbrook Gazette, ran a front-page story about the upcoming town hall, rehashing the incident with Zoe and detailing the judge's proposed changes. The article sparked heated debates in coffee shops, church meetings, and family dinners across town. As the day of the town hall approached, Judge Hawthorne found himself under increasing scrutiny. He received calls from colleagues in the legal community, some offering support, others expressing concern about the potential implications of his actions. Few even suggested that by admitting his mistake so publicly, he was undermining the authority of the entire judicial system. Despite the pressure, Judge Hawthorne remained committed to his decision. He spent hours researching issues of bias in the justice system, reading studies and articles that challenged many of his long-held beliefs. The more he learned, the more he realized how much he had to learn. On the evening of the town hall, the Millbrook Community Center was packed to capacity. The tension in the air was palpable as Judge Hawthorne took the stage alongside Mayor Carter and other community leaders. As he looked out at the sea of faces, some friendly, some hostile, many simply curious, Judge Hawthorne felt a moment of panic. Then his eyes fell on Zoe Johnson and her family, sitting in the front row. The determination on their faces gave him the courage to begin. "Good evening," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I stand before you today not as a judge, but as a man who has made a mistake. A mistake born out of ignorance and prejudice that I didn't even realize I harbored." He went on to recount the incident with Zoe, not sparing himself in the retelling. "I saw a young black girl making hand gestures I didn't understand, and I immediately assumed the worst. I didn't consider that she might be using sign language, or that she had every right to be there. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and in doing so, I failed not only Zoe and her family, but all of Millbrook." As he spoke, the room fell silent. Even those who had come ready to argue found themselves listening intently. "This incident opened my eyes to the fact that we have serious issues in our community that need to be addressed," Judge Hawthorne continued. "Issues of racial bias, lack of understanding for people with disabilities, of a justice system that doesn't always serve all our citizens equally. He then outlined his proposals for the community task force and for a series of educational initiatives aimed at promoting understanding and inclusivity in Millbrook. As he spoke, he could see nods of agreement from many in the audience, though there were also frowns and crossed arms among some of the older residents. When he finished, Mayor Carter opened the floor for comments and questions. What followed was an intense, often emotional discussion that lasted for hours. People from all walks of life in Millbrook stood up to share their experiences, their fears, and their hopes for the community. Zoe's father, Marcus Johnson, spoke passionately about the challenges his family had faced as one of the few Black families in town. Mrs. Thompson shared stories of students with disabilities who had been overlooked or misunderstood. Even Officer Chen stepped up to talk about the need for better training in the police force to handle diverse situations. As the meeting went on, Judge Hawthorne found himself both heartened and humbled by what he heard. The depth of feeling and the complexity of the issues at hand were far greater than he had imagined. He realized that his decision to address these problems was just the first step on a long and challenging journey. The town hall ended late into the night with the formation of the community task force and a commitment to ongoing dialogue and action. As people filed out of the community center, there was a sense of cautious optimism in the air. Change wouldn't come easily, but at least now they were talking about the issues openly. For Judge Hawthorne, the consequences of his decision were just beginning to unfold. He knew that he had likely made some enemies and that his reputation in certain circles might never fully recover. But as he watched Zoe and her family leaving the meeting, their heads held high and small smiles on their faces, he knew he had made the right choice. The next day, as he sat in his chambers preparing for court, Judge Hawthorne received an unexpected visitor. It was Zoe, accompanied by her mother. "Your Honor," Zoe signed, her mother interpreting, "I wanted to thank you for what you did last night. Couldn't have been easy." Judge Hawthorne smiled, feeling a lump form in his throat. "No, it wasn't easy," he admitted, "but it was necessary, and I should be thanking you, Zoe. You taught me a valuable lesson." As they left, Judge Hawthorne turned to the case files on his desk with a new perspective. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult. For the first time in years, he felt truly energized by his work. His decision had set in motion changes that would reshape Millbrook, and he was determined to see them through, whatever the consequences might be. As the main events unfolded around Judge Hawthorne's decision and its immediate consequences, a secondary plot began to develop, centered around Officer Sarah Chen and her role in the Millbrook Police Department. In the wake of the town hall meeting, Officer Chen found herself thrust into the spotlight. Her handling of the situation with Zoe had been praised by many as an example of good policing, but it had also put her at odds with some of her more traditional colleagues. Chief of Police Robert Garrett, a longtime friend of Judge Hawthorne, called Officer Chen into his office the day after the town hall. "Chen," he said, his tone gruff but not unkind, "I want you to head up our department's involvement in this new community task force." Officer Chen was surprised by the assignment. "Are you sure, Chief? I'm still relatively new here, and I know some of the other officers have concerns about these changes." Chief Garrett nodded, a wry smile on his face. "That's exactly why I want you to do it. You've got a fresh perspective, and you've shown good judgment. Plus, you've already got the trust of the Johnson family and their supporters." As Officer Chen dove into her new role, she began to uncover deeper issues within the police department. She found that many officers, particularly those who had been on the force for years, were resistant to change. They saw the new initiatives as a threat to their authority and a criticism of their past work. Meanwhile, Zoe Johnson and her friend Alex had been inspired by recent events to start a club at their school focused on promoting understanding of disabilities and diverse forms of communication. They called it the Bridge Club, with the motto, "Building understanding, one conversation at a time." The club quickly gained popularity, attracting students from various backgrounds who were eager to learn sign language and discuss issues of inclusivity. Mrs. Thompson, seeing the potential in the students' initiative, became the club's faculty advisor. As part of their activities, the Bridge Club decided to create a series of educational videos about different forms of communication and the experiences of people with disabilities. They reached out to Officer Chen, inviting her to participate in a video about police interactions with the deaf and hard of hearing community. Officer Chen, seeing an opportunity to build better relationships between the police and young people in Millbrook, eagerly agreed. The day of the video shoot, she arrived at the school in her uniform, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Zoe and Alex had prepared a series of scenarios for Officer Chen to act out, demonstrating both good and bad ways for police to interact with deaf individuals. As they worked together, Officer Chen found herself impressed by the students' maturity and insight. "You know," she said during a break in filming, "I think we could use something like this in our police training. Would you be interested in presenting to our department sometime?" Zoe's eyes lit up at the suggestion, and she began signing excitedly to Alex. The idea of directly contributing to police training was beyond anything they had imagined when they started the club. As word of the Bridge Club's project spread, it caught the attention of local media. The Millbrook Gazette ran a feature story on the club and its collaboration with the police department, complete with photos of Officer Chen learning sign language from Zoe and Alex. The article had an unexpected effect. Some of the older officers, who had been skeptical of the changes happening in the department, were touched by the image of their colleague making an effort to connect with the community in a new way. It sparked conversations within the force about the importance of adaptability and continuous learning in their profession. At the next community task force meeting, Officer Chen presented the idea of incorporating the Bridge Club's videos into police training. Judge Hawthorne, who was chairing the meeting, was visibly moved by the proposal. "This is exactly the kind of initiative we need," he said, looking around the table at the assembled community leaders. "It's not just about changing policies. It's about changing hearts and minds, starting with our young people." As the secondary plot developed, it became clear that the ripple effects of the original incident were spreading far beyond Judge Hawthorne and the Johnsons. Collaboration between the Bridge Club and the police department was breaking down barriers and fostering understanding in ways that formal policies alone could not achieve. Officer Chen, reflecting on the unexpected turn her career had taken, felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced. She realized that her role in Millbrook was becoming about much more than just enforcing the law. She was helping to shape a new kind of community, one where diversity was celebrated and communication barriers were actively addressed. As the Bridge Club's influence grew and Officer Chen's role in the community expanded, it became clear that the changes in Millbrook were not just top-down decisions, but a grassroots movement that was transforming the town from within. The secondary plot was weaving itself intricately into the main narrative, creating a richer, more complex story, a community in transformation. As the weeks passed following the town hall meeting, the relationships between key figures in Millbrook began to evolve in unexpected ways. At the center of this web of changing dynamics was the growing connection between Judge William Hawthorne and the Johnson family. Initially, the relationship had been tense, marked by mistrust and hurt on both sides. But as they worked together on the community task force, cautious respect began to develop. Judge Hawthorne found himself consistently impressed by Marcus Johnson's thoughtful contributions and Tanya's compassionate insights. For their part, the Johnsons saw a genuine desire for change in the judge that softened their initial anger towards him. One afternoon, after a particularly productive task force meeting, Judge Hawthorne approached Marcus as everyone was leaving. "Mr. Johnson," he said, his voice hesitant, "I was wondering if you and your family might be willing to join me for dinner this weekend. I think it's time we got to know each other better outside of these meetings." Marcus was taken aback by the invitation. He glanced at Tanya, who nodded slightly. "We'd be honored, Your Honor," he replied, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The dinner, held at a local restaurant, started off awkwardly. Zoe, sensing the tension, broke the ice by teaching Judge Hawthorne some basic sign language. As the judge fumbled through signs for hello and thank you, the mood lightened considerably. As the evening progressed, they found themselves sharing stories and discovering common ground. Judge Hawthorne spoke about his own granddaughter, who was close to Zoe's age, and the challenges she faced as a young woman in today's world. The Johnsons shared their experiences as a black family in a predominantly white town, opening the judge's eyes to realities he had never fully considered before. By the end of the night, there was a newfound warmth between them. As they were saying goodbye, Judge Hawthorne surprised everyone by signing friend to Zoe. His technique was clumsy, but the sentiment behind it was clear. Meanwhile, Officer Sarah Chen's relationship with the community was also undergoing a significant transformation. Her involvement with the Bridge Club had made her a familiar and welcome face at the high school. Students who had once viewed the police with suspicion now greeted her with smiles and waves. This change didn't go unnoticed by her colleagues. Some, like Officer Mike Delaney, a 20-year veteran of the force, were skeptical at first. "You're getting too chummy with the civilians, Chen," he warned one day at the station. "It's going to make it hard to do your job when push comes to shove." But as Officer Chen's approach began to yield results, improved community relations, more cooperative witnesses, even a few tips that helped solve long-standing cases, even the skeptics began to come around. Officer Delaney, to everyone's surprise, asked Chen to teach him some basic sign language, just in case. The relationship between Zoe and Alex, the co-founders of the Bridge Club, also deepened as they worked together on their various projects. Their friendship, already strong, blossomed into a partnership that inspired those around them. They complemented each other perfectly. Zoe's passion and creativity balanced by Alex's pragmatism and organizational skills. One day, as they were editing their latest video for the police training program, Alex turned to Zoe with a serious expression. "You know," he said, signing as he spoke, "I've been thinking, what we're doing here, it's bigger than just Millbrook. We could take this to other schools, other towns." Zoe's eyes lit up at the idea. She began signing rapidly, her excitement palpable. "You're right. We could create a network of bridge clubs across the state, maybe even the country. Imagine the impact we could have." Their enthusiasm caught the attention of Mrs. Thompson, who had been observing from across the room. She approached the teens with a smile. "I couldn't help overhearing," she said. "If you're serious about expanding the Bridge Club, I have some contacts at the State Board of Education who might be interested in hearing about your work." Possibility of taking their initiative to a larger stage added a new dimension to Zoe and Alex's relationship. They began to see themselves not just as friends or club co-founders, but as partners in a mission that could potentially change lives across the country. As these various relationships evolved, they created a network of understanding and support, began to transform Millbrook from the inside out. The town, which had once been divided by the incident at the courthouse, was slowly becoming a model of community engagement and inclusivity. Judge Hawthorne, reflecting on these changes one evening in his chambers, felt a sense of awe at how far they had come in such a short time. He thought about his growing friendship with the Johnson, the way Officer Chen had revolutionized community policing, and the inspiring work of Zoe and Alex. He realized that the relationships forming in Millbrook were more than just individual connections. They were the threads of a new social fabric, one that was stronger and more inclusive than what had come before. As he prepared to leave for the day, Judge Hawthorne paused at his desk. He picked up a framed photo that had recently taken its place among his law books and family pictures. It was a group shot from the last community task force meeting. Himself, Johnson's, Officer Chen, Zoe and Alex, Mrs. Thompson, and others, all smiling together. Looking at the photo, Judge Hawthorne felt a warmth in his chest. These people, who had once been strangers or even adversaries, were now an integral part of his life. Their relationships, born out of conflict but nurtured by a shared commitment to change, were redefining what it meant to be a community. With a smile, Judge Hawthorne turned off his office light and headed home, looking forward to the next day and the continued growth of these precious new bonds. The months of hard work, relationship building, and community initiatives in Millbrook were about to face their greatest test. The annual Millbrook Heritage Festival, a weekend-long celebration of the town's history and culture, was approaching. This year, however, the festival would be different. The Community Task Force had decided to use the event as a platform to showcase Millbrook's newfound commitment to inclusivity and understanding. As the festival weekend arrived, the town was buzzing with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The main street was lined with booths representing various community groups, including a prominent display by the Bridge Club. Zoe and Alex had worked tirelessly to create an interactive exhibit that allowed visitors to learn basic sign language and experience a simulation of what it's like to navigate the world with a hearing impairment. Judge Hawthorne, as a key figure in the town's recent changes, was scheduled to give the opening speech. As he stood on the stage, looking out at the diverse crowd gathered in the town square, he felt the weight of the moment. "Friends, neighbors, visitors," began, his voice carrying across the square, "welcome to the Millbrook Heritage Festival. This year, we celebrate not just our past, but our present and our future. Future that embraces all members of our community, regardless of race, ability, or background." As he spoke, Judge Hawthorne could see a mix of reactions in the crowd. Many were nodding in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable or even angry. Pressed on, determined to make his point. "A few months ago, I made a mistake that opened my eyes to the biases and misunderstandings that have divided our community for too long. Today, I stand before you not just as your judge, but as a man committed to learning, growing, and fostering a truly inclusive Millbrook." Just as Judge Hawthorne was reaching the climax of his speech, a commotion erupted near the back of the crowd. A group of protesters, led by some of the more conservative members of the community, began shouting and waving signs. "Keep Millbrook traditional." One sign read, "No special treatment." The crowd began to stir uneasily, festive atmosphere quickly evaporating. Judge Hawthorne faltered for a moment, unsure how to proceed. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw Zoe making her way to the stage, her parents and Alex close behind. Without hesitation, Zoe climbed the steps and stood beside the judge. She began to sign, her movements graceful and purposeful. Tanya Johnson stepped forward to interpret. "This is what inclusion looks like." Zoe sighed, her expression determined. "It's not about special treatment. It's about equal opportunity. It's about understanding and respecting each other's differences." The crowd fell silent, all eyes on the young girl whose bravery and eloquence were impossible to ignore. Even the protesters lowered their signs, momentarily stunned. Emboldened by Zoe's courage, others began to step forward. Mrs. Thompson brought a group of students from various backgrounds to the stage. Officer Chen joined them, still in uniform, a visible symbol of the changes in the police force. As more and more people joined Zoe and Judge Hawthorne on the stage, a powerful image of unity began to form. The diversity of Millbrook was on full display. People of different races, abilities, ages, and backgrounds standing together. Seeing the impact of this spontaneous demonstration, Judge Hawthorne made a split-second decision. He turned to Zoe and asked her to teach him the signs for his next words. Then, facing the crowd, he began to speak and sign simultaneously, his movements unpracticed but sincere. "This is Millbrook," he signed. "All of us, together. Our differences don't divide us. They make us stronger." The effect was electric. A cheer went up from the crowd, drowning out the last remnants of protest. People began to applaud, many with tears in their eyes, moved by the powerful display of community solidarity. As the applause died down, something unexpected happened. One of the protest leaders, a man named Frank Wilson, who had been one of Judge Hawthorne's most vocal critics, slowly made his way to the stage. The crowd parted to let him through, watching in tense silence. Frank climbed the steps, his face a mix of emotion. He stood face to face with Judge Hawthorne for a long moment, then extended his hand. "I may not agree with everything that's happening," Frank said, his voice gruff but sincere, "but I can't deny the positive changes I've seen in this town. Maybe it's time I learned a thing or two as well." As Judge Hawthorne shook Frank's hand, another cheer erupted from the crowd. What had begun as a potential disaster had transformed into a powerful moment of community healing and unity. The Millbrook Heritage Festival continued, but it was clear to everyone present that they had just witnessed a pivotal moment in the town's history. The climactic event had not just averted a crisis. It had cemented the changes that had been building for months and opened the door for greater understanding. As the day went on, the festival became a true celebration of Millbrook's diversity and newfound unity. The Bridge Club's booth was overwhelmed with visitors eager to learn sign language. Officer Chen led a well-attended workshop on community policing. Even the protesters, led by Frank, engaged in thoughtful discussions with those they had once opposed. Judge Hawthorne, watching it all unfold, felt a profound sense of hope. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but Millbrook had shown that it was ready to face them together. In the wake of the dramatic events at the Millbrook Heritage Festival, the town found itself at a crossroads. A powerful display of unity had opened many hearts and minds, but it had also brought long, simmering tensions to the surface. It was clear that while progress had been made, there was still work to be done to truly resolve the conflict within the community. Judge Hawthorne, recognizing the critical nature of this moment, called an emergency meeting of the Community Task Force. As the members gathered in the town hall meeting room, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of hope and apprehension. What we witnessed at the festival was inspiring. Judge Hawthorne began, looking around the table at the diverse faces of the task force members. But it also showed us how deep the divisions in our community run. We need to address these issues head-on if we want to move forward. Marcus Johnson nodded in agreement. The protesters at the festival, they're our neighbors, our coworkers. We can't just dismiss their concerns, even if we disagree with them. We need to find a way to bring everyone to the table. Officer Chen, who had been taking notes, spoke up. What if we organized a series of community dialogues, open forums where people can express their concerns and ideas in a structured, respectful environment? The suggestion was met with murmurs of approval around the table. Mrs. Thompson built on the idea. We could have themed sessions, one on law enforcement and community relations, another on education and inclusivity, maybe one specifically addressing the concerns of our longtime residents about preserving Millbrook's heritage. As the task force debated the logistics of these community dialogues, Zoe raised her hand. When she had everyone's attention, she began to sign, with her mother interpreting. I think it's important that these dialogues are accessible to everyone, Zoe signed. We should have sign language interpreters at all sessions, and maybe offer childcare so parents can attend. Judge Hawthorne smiled at Zoe's thoughtfulness. Excellent point, he said. We want these dialogues to be as inclusive as possible. Let's also consider having some sessions at different times of day to accommodate various work schedules. With the plan taking shape, the task force members left the meeting energized and ready to put their ideas into action. Over the next few weeks, they worked tirelessly to organize the community dialogue. Flyers were distributed, announcements made on local radio and in the Millbrook Gazette, and personal invitations extended to key community members, including those who had been part of the protest group. The first dialogue session was scheduled for a Wednesday evening at the community center. As people began to arrive, there was a palpable tension in the air. Supporters of the recent changes sat on one side of the room, while those who had protested at the festival gathered on the other. Judge Hawthorne, serving as moderator for the session, took a deep breath before stepping to the front of the room. Good evening, everyone, he began. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. We're here to listen to each other, to try to understand different perspectives, and to work together towards a Millbrook that serves all its residents. He then introduced the ground rules for the dialogue. Speak respectfully, listen actively, and focus on sharing personal experiences rather than making accusations. With these guidelines established, he opened the floor for discussion. At first, the conversation was stilted and uncomfortable, but as people began to share their stories and concerns, the atmosphere gradually shifted. Frank Wilson, the former protest leader, stood up to speak. I've lived in Millbrook my whole life, he said, his voice gruff but earnest. My family's been here for generations. When all these changes started happening, it felt like the town I knew was disappearing. I was scared, and yeah, I lashed out. I paused, looking around the room. But seeing everyone come together at the festival, it made me realize that maybe change isn't always a bad thing. I still have concerns, but I'm here to listen and learn. Frank's honesty seemed to break the ice. Others began to speak up, sharing their fears, hopes, and ideas for the future of Millbrook. A young mother talked about her worries for her deaf child's future in the town. A longtime business owner expressed concerns about how changing demographics might affect his customer base. As the dialogue progressed, something remarkable began to happen. People who had been on opposite sides of the issue started to find common ground. They discovered shared values, a love for their community, a desire for safety and prosperity, a hope for a better future for their children. Zoe and Alex, sitting with the other members of the Bridge Club, watched in amazement as the adults in the room began to bridge their own divides. Inspired, Zoe stood up and made her way to the front of the room. She began to sign, with Alex stepping up to interpret for her. "I know a lot of you are afraid of change," Zoe signed. "But change doesn't have to mean losing what makes Millbrook special. It can mean making our town even better. A place where everyone feels welcome and valued. Isn't that what we all want?" Her words seemed to resonate with everyone in the room. Even those who had been most resistant to the recent changes found themselves nodding in agreement. As the session wound down, Judge Hawthorne felt a sense of cautious optimism. They hadn't solved all their problems in one night, but they had taken a significant step forward. People were talking to each other, really listening, perhaps for the first time in years. "This is just the beginning," he said as he closed the meeting. "We have more dialogues planned, and I hope to see all of you there. Remember, we're all part of the Millbrook community. We may not agree on everything. We're in this together." As people filed out of the community center, there was a buzz of conversation. Former adversaries were exchanging contact information, making plans to continue their discussions over coffee. Bridge Club members were surrounded by people interested in learning more about their initiative. Judge Hawthorne, watching it all unfold, felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They still had a long way to go. This attempt at conflict resolution had shown that there was hope for Millbrook. The town was beginning to heal, come together in ways he had once thought impossible. As he left the community center, Judge Hawthorne found himself walking alongside Frank Wilson. The two men, once on opposite sides of a deep divide, now walked in companionable silence, both contemplating the evening's events and the path forward for their beloved town. The series of community dialogues proved to be a turning point for Millbrook. Over the course of several weeks, residents from all walks of life came together to share their perspectives, air grievances, and work towards common solutions. What had begun as an attempt at conflict resolution was evolving into something much more profound, a reimagining of what Millbrook could be. As the final dialogue session concluded, there was a sense of anticipation in the air. People lingered, reluctant to leave, engaged in animated conversations about the future of their town. It was clear that Millbrook was on the cusp of a new direction. Judge Hawthorne, observing the buzz of activity, felt a mixture of pride and humility. He realized that the changes in Millbrook had taken on a life of their own, growing beyond what he or any individual could have envisioned. Zoe approached him, her eyes shining with excitement. She began to sign, with Alex interpreting beside her. "Judge Hawthorne, we have an idea. What if we took everything we've learned from these dialogues and created a comprehensive plan for Millbrook's future? A roadmap for inclusion and growth that could guide the town for years to come." The judge considered her words carefully. "That's an ambitious idea, Zoe, but I think you might be onto something. We've opened up important conversation, but we need a way to turn all this goodwill into concrete action." Word of the proposal spread quickly through the room. Soon, a crowd had gathered around Judge and Zoe, eagerly discussing the possibility of creating a long-term plan for Millbrook. Mayor Linda Carter, who had been quietly supportive of the recent changes, stepped forward. "I think this is exactly what Millbrook needs," he said. "We could form a diverse committee to draft the plan with input from all sectors of our community." The energy in the room was palpable. People who had once been at odds were now excitedly sharing ideas for Millbrook's future. It was a visible representation of how far the town had come. Officer Chen, who had been listening intently, spoke up. We could include goals for community police relations, educational initiatives, and economic development that benefits all residents. Frank Wilson, the former protest leader, surprised everyone by adding his voice to the discussion. We should make sure we're preserving the best parts of Millbrook's heritage while embracing these new ideas. It doesn't have to be one or the other. We can honor our past and build a better future. As the impromptu planning session continued, Judge Hawthorne stepped back, taking in the scene before him. He realized that Millbrook had reached a crucial turning point. The town was no longer simply reacting to past mistakes or current challenges. Instead, it was proactively charting a course for a more inclusive and vibrant future. This new direction would require ongoing effort, open communication, and a willingness to grapple with difficult issues. But looking at the diverse group of people eagerly planning together, Zoe and her friends, longtime residents like Frank, newcomers like Officer Chen, and town leaders, Judge Hawthorne felt a surge of optimism. Millbrook was transforming, not just in its policies or programs, but in its very identity. The town was becoming a model of how a community could come together, face its challenges honestly, and emerge stronger and more united. As the meeting finally began to break up with plans for the new committee to convene soon, Judge Hawthorne couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. What had begun with a misunderstanding and a hasty judgment had led to a profound transformation, not just of the town, but of himself and so many others. Millbrook was embarking on a new chapter, one full of promise and possibility. And Judge Hawthorne, along with every other resident, was eager to see where this new direction would lead them. As the weeks turned into months following Millbrook's decision to create a comprehensive inclusion plan, the characters at the heart of this journey found themselves reflecting on their personal growth and the transformations they had witnessed. Judge William Hawthorne, sitting in his chambers one quiet afternoon, marveled at how much he had changed. The man who had once prided himself on his swift judgments now approached every situation, careful consideration, and an open mind. He thought back to the day he had called the police on Zoe, cringing at the memory but grateful for the wake-up call it had provided. Hadn't just made him a better jurist, but a better person. He now actively sought out diverse perspectives, recognizing that true justice required a deep understanding of the community he served. Across town, Zoe Johnson sat at her desk, putting the finishing touches on a presentation for the Inclusion Plan Committee. She paused, her hands hovering over her laptop keyboard, as she considered how far she had come. Once a shy girl who felt isolated by her hearing impairment, Zoe had blossomed into a confident young leader. "I never thought my voice, my hands, could make such a difference," she signed to herself, smiling at the thought. Zoe realized that her journey had not only empowered her, but had shown her the power of advocacy and the importance of standing up for oneself and others. Officer Sarah Chen, patrolling the streets of Millbrook, reflected on her own transformation. She had arrived in town seeing her job as simply enforcing the law. Now, she understood that true community policing was about building relationships, understanding different perspectives, and being a positive force for change. As she waved to a group of teenagers, members of the bridge club she had come to know well, Officer Chen felt a sense of pride in the role she had played in Millbrook's evolution. This is what it means to protect and serve, she thought, realizing that her growth as an officer had made her more effective and fulfilled in her work. For Marcus and Tanya Johnson, Zoe's parents, past months had been a journey of advocacy and empowerment. They had always fought for their daughter's rights, but the events in Millbrook had shown them the power of community action. "We're not just changing things for Zoe," Tanya remarked to Marcus one evening. "We're paving the way for all families like ours." They had grown from protective parents to community leaders, using their experience to help shape a more inclusive Millbrook for everyone. Even Frank Wilson, once the voice of opposition to change in Millbrook, found himself on a path of unexpected growth. As he sat in on another planning committee meeting, actively listening and contributing ideas, Frank realized how much his worldview had expanded. "I was so afraid of losing the Millbrook I knew," confided to Judge Hawthorne after the meeting. "I never imagined that embracing change could make our town even better." Frank's growth from a vocal opponent to an engaged participant in Millbrook's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic example of the town's evolving spirit. Alex, Zoe's best friend and co-founder of the Bridge Club, also experienced significant personal growth. Once content to stay in the background, Alex had found a voice as an advocate and ally. "Working with Zoe and the Bridge Club showed me that I have the power to make a difference," Alex reflected. "I've learned that being a good friend sometimes means standing up and speaking out." Mrs. Thompson, science teacher who had supported Zoe from the beginning, saw her role in education evolve. She had always been a good teacher, but now she was a champion for inclusive education. "Every student deserves to be seen, heard, and supported," she often said, her teaching philosophy now extending far beyond the walls of her classroom. Mayor Linda Carter, who had initially been cautious about the changes in Millbrook, found herself leading a town that was becoming a model for community transformation. She reflected on how her own leadership style had grown, becoming more collaborative and inclusive. "I've learned that the best solutions come when we bring everyone to the table," she noted during a town council meeting. As each individual reflected on their journey, a common thread emerged. They all recognized that their personal growth was inextricably linked to the growth of their community. The challenges they had faced, conversations they had engaged in, and the changes they had worked towards had not just transformed Millbrook, they had transformed its people. Judge Hawthorne, pondering this collective growth, decided to organize a special gathering. He invited all those who had been central to Millbrook's journey: Zoe and her family, Officer Chen, Frank Wilson, Mrs. Thompson, Mayor Carter, and many others, to a dinner at his home. As they gathered around the table, the judge raised his glass for a toast. "To Millbrook," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "and to all of us. A few months ago, we were strangers, some of us even adversaries. Today, we're a community in the truest sense of the word. We've grown, we've learned, and we've become better versions of ourselves." Zoe, with Alex interpreting, added her own thoughts. "We've shown that when we open our minds and hearts, anything is possible. Millbrook isn't just a town anymore. It's a beacon of hope for what a community can achieve when it comes together." As they shared stories and laughter late into the night, each person at the table felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey they had undertaken together. They had all grown in ways they never expected. Their worldviews expanded, their empathy deepened, and their commitment to justice and inclusion strengthened. The transformation of Millbrook was far from over, but as this group of once unlikely allies looked towards the future, they did so with hope, determination, and a deep appreciation for how far they had come, both as individuals and as a community. In the end, what had started with a misunderstanding and a hasty judgment had blossomed into a powerful lesson in the potential for growth, understanding, and positive change. Millbrook, and all those who called it home, would never be the same again. As the sun rose on Millbrook, 1 year after the fateful day when Judge Hawthorne had misinterpreted Zoe's sign language, the town gathered for a special ceremony. The occasion was the unveiling of a new mural on the side of the courthouse, vibrant depiction of hands of all colors signing the word community against a backdrop of Millbrook's skyline. Judge Hawthorne stood before the assembled crowd, Zoe by his side, ready to make the opening speech. As he looked out at the faces before him, a diverse tapestry of ages, races, and abilities, felt a swell of emotion. "A year ago," he began, "a misunderstanding opened our eyes to the biases and barriers that divided us. Today we stand united, not in spite of our differences, but because of them. We've learned that true justice and community aren't about treating everyone the same, but about recognizing and valuing each person's unique experiences and needs." Zoe then stepped forward, signing her part of the speech with confidence as Alex interpreted. "This mural represents more than just a moment in Millbrook's history. It's a promise to continue learning, growing, and building a community where everyone has a voice and everyone is heard. As the mural was unveiled to applause and cheers, the themes that had shaped Millbrook's journey were clear. Power of communication and understanding, the importance of challenging one's own biases, the strength found in diversity, and the potential for positive change when a community comes together. All were reflected in the colorful image and in the faces of those gathered to celebrate it. Mayor Carter, taking the podium, announced the official adoption of Millbrook's comprehensive inclusion plan. This plan, she declared, ensures that the lessons we've learned and the progress we've made will continue to shape our town for generations to come. As the ceremony concluded and the people of Millbrook mingled, sharing stories and dreams for the future, it was clear that the town had not just overcome a challenge, it had been transformed by it. The misunderstanding that had once threatened to divide them had become the catalyst, creating a more just, inclusive, and united community. Millbrook stood as a testament to the fact that with open hearts, willing minds, and committed action, even the most deeply rooted biases could be overcome, and a true community, one that values and includes all its members, could be built.